my DNA. It's, you know, when
Everything.
Security
Sure.
clearance.
Yeah. Social Security is almost minor these days.
Yeah.
And it's and our Social Securities are everywhere. My mother says, I don't give it to anybody. I said, Mom, I think it's too late.
Okay. A little bit in the way there. Oh, we got nobody remote and a small crowd here. Is it the Tuesday night versus the Thursday night for people, maybe? Everybody else? What's the air set at there?
Pasadena Steakhouse
Would you
didn't have any
put
business
the air
in
at?
71.
Publix was empty. Everyone. Empty.
One.
It's pretty cool.
But I don't feel it kicking in.
I don't hear it.
He shut the lights off in there, they'll make the difference.
Yeah, we only have so much power.
Right.
Computer, lights, and air? No, I don't think so.
This is a low budget.
The squirrels are going to
We can complain about a lot of things, but not having enough money for power is not one of them. Just put it down to like 70 and let it sit.
Yeah. It says 75, but it didn't kick in.
Either
What
it
can I
will
tell you?
Or it won't.
or it won't.
Uh-huh.
We've got a 50-50 chance of it, doing something for us. All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Checking in okay?
I like this top.
I like this topic. Good. I hope you still like it at the end of the evening.
That's the test.
All right. So I just decided for your benefit, for those of you who didn't have or lost their copy of the Blessing for Torah study, to put it at the bottom of the resource sheet for tonight. So there's really nothing else on the sheet till you need till the very, very end of the evening, or never at all possibly, except for the blessing. So let's start with our blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. B'divrei Torah. And I'm thinking that there's something sitting up there on the copy machine, but I'll run up and get it maybe later. Yeah, it definitely is. So I had a nice sheet that I made up for you, and oh no, it's actually on the printer. I know that's where it is. So I thought, well, it has the nice logo on it. I'll print it in color. It's sitting up on the front printer.
And then you got a call.
Well, no, then 18 other things happened between 3:30 this afternoon and now. In any event, that piece of paper had a place for you to put your name, to put your personal spiritual practice goal. So kind of hopefully by now you've chosen what it is you're doing with that spiritual practice, your personal learning, individual study, independent study goal, and a reminder that sometime during December or January, I wanted to be seeing each of you individually for a brief half-hour appointment to kind of check in on how you were going with those things, and in particular your independent study, because by then we'd be about halfway through the year, believe it or not. So for those of you who are feeling panicked, like, oh my gosh, I guess I better get started, well, then get started. And for those who already started, mazel tov, well done. If we don't end up with a break where I run up and get those papers off the printer, then just know that the most important piece of it is not so much the reporting into me, though I'd love to know from those of you who I haven't heard from. But what I'd really like to just put you to do is get on the phone or send an email to Angela and get a half-hour window in my schedule in December, January, because February 2nd, I'm gone for 6 weeks. So
You going to Israel?
going to Israel for 2 weeks, yeah. All right, so we are on session 3, individual and community. So I thought I'd start with a story. One of my favorite stories. There was a rabbi who noticed that a certain member of the community had not been attending the synagogue regularly in the past few weeks. Had been very regular before that, and was kind of concerned, and so decided to pay this man a visit, and entered the living room, and the rabbi noticed that the man was sitting by the fireplace and seemed to be in good health, and sat down next to him, and the rabbi kind of politely inquired about the reason why, where have you been lately? Why haven't you been at shul lately? And the man required, well, the shul, the synagogue, it's kind of crowded and noisy, and I decided that my prayers would be more meaningful to God if I was alone and undisturbed. And the rabbi did not respond. He stared at the fireplace, and after a while, kind of thought, it's filled with glowing coals, and he rose from his seat, and he took the tongs for the fireplace, and he removed one ember from the fire with the tongs, and placed it on the kind of hearth in front of the fireplace. And then he said, I hope to see you back in shul shortly. That was it. He left. Now, the man at first was kind of puzzled by the rabbi's actions, right? But soon the meaning became clear to him. Is the meaning clear to any of you?
Yeah,
What was the rabbi's message?
If you leave the congregation, your flame can go out. The other flames could start going out if everybody left.
Right. The coals, the embers, create a fire when they're all together in the fireplace. But pull one out, and it's very quickly going to cool off and die off. Right? The text in Judaism that describes that is al tifros min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the community. As a saying from Pirkei Avot, from the ethics of the rabbis, or the sages, or sometimes referred to as the sayings of the fathers. One of the tractates of the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud. These are all glossary terms. Refer glossary somewhere in your notebook, right? For Mishnah, Talmud, what are these things? Rabbinic code of laws. But these aren't laws really so much as they are aphorisms or wisdom sayings in Pirkei Avot, in the wisdom of the sages. Don't separate yourself from the community. So if we were to take that kind of at face value, then what question immediately jumps to mind for us is people living in modernity, especially in America.
Be involved in the community.
Well, that's the uts from the text, right? Right. But what's the problematic about the text? Why are so many Jews unaffiliated? Okay, right. How about why should I? Right?
Are we talking about general, or are we talking about Jews?
Well, we're talking about anybody in America today. I mean, the modern ethos is all about me. Right? Isn't it all about me? I thought it was all about me.
I heard today that the numbers for young people becoming affiliated are increasing in the country. I mean, for
The numbers of young Jews affiliating?
not Jews,
Young people all together in religious life?
Yeah.
Huh?
I don't know if that's true.
I don't know.
I'm trying to recall what context, and I don't remember. But it was
NPR reporting on the Pew study, some Pew study, a Pew Center for Religion.
Because I didn't think that.
Right.
But
Um,
also,
Be
there
interesting. I don't know.
was something on television just tonight that there are, what was it, that people are less religious now than they have ever been in this country. Am I right?
Yeah, 27% they said.
On the news tonight.
Just before we left the house, yes.
Right.
Hmm.
So
27%.
Was
Yeah,
it,
it's
Are
that-
religious?
Our contemporary,
was that, the report that I heard tonight said something, I can't remember what it said. Either it was that compared to the rest of the civilized world, we are less affiliated or we are more affiliated. I don't remember which it was. It's one of the two.
One of the two. Well, it's either more people will come or more people won't come, right? Either it'll go on or it won't go on.
That we were pretty much any other country.
And I've heard just the opposite.
Well, they
Even
could be
though
the
we are
opposite.
less, we're still more than
Well,
the Western
all
Europeans.
right. Somebody's got to research and report back. What is the latest studies telling us?
And according to who?
And according to who?
I was really talking about sort of the struggle between the ethos in America of the individual and individuality versus the kind of underlying value expressed in that story and that text of community, right? And that there is a tension between, is it all about me as an individual, right? Or is it about community, right? So, like, we've walked in and we've just sat down because we're a little community of study, but we didn't do introductions. So let's go around and do that because it is a little bit about me, isn't it? All right. Okay.
We should have name tags too. 'cause
We
I
should.
forget.
Or placards we could put in front of us. Right? Like the ambassador.
Right.
So
Terry
the ambassador from
Hartman
Texas.
Yes, right. Terry Hartman Footnick.
Ambassador Alpha.
Livingston Fiber.
Judy Churchak.
Marjorie Friedman.
Ellen Asher.
Lisa Kitzich, Jenna Perry.
Great.
Jenna.
Jenna.
Great.
Okay, great. So, which is it in Jewish life? Right? Is it more about the individual, more about the community? How do we balance between the two? So, I want you to think back to the story of creation. What do you remember about the story of creation? Creation of humanity in
Which
particular.
one?
Okay, which one? Good. Excellent question. All right. So the first thing is that there's two. All right, that's good. All right, so what's the difference in the creation of humanity between the first and the second story?
One was actually about me, and the second one is about reporting, or not reporting, but being dutiful to God, trying to do the
That's
right
interesting.
thing.
Okay. That's an interesting way to distinguish them. Which one's which?
First group was what they consider Adam 1,
Okay.
was
It's
about me
Okay.
making sure that I take care of, that person, a relationship only to individuals,
Okay.
not to God. The second Adam is to God, making sure that I'm righteous, therefore I can try to make other people righteous rather than the other way around.
Okay. All right. Interesting way of just distinguishing between the two. All right. In terms of the story itself, what do you remember about kind of the creation of humanity, or the creation of Adam, or Adam and Eve?
They were in a garden.
Okay, so remember the garden. So let's get before the garden, right? So before the garden,
Oh God.
how about that rib thing?
Right.
Who remembers that rib story?
Right.
Remember that's why anybody watch MASH in the day when MASH was on?
Yes.
MASH, right? Do you remember the episode about Adam's ribs? About that he got this craving that he had to have. What he had to have was ribs from this rib place in Chicago. I think it was in Chicago,
Right.
in Chicago or Detroit. I don't remember. Someplace. I think maybe it's Detroit. I don't know. And they went through all these shenanigans about calling up and ordering out a takeout order of like 40 pounds of ribs and 3 gallons of sauce and of slaw and send them by overnight air freight to San Francisco, to the military base there, and we'll get it from there. This whole story. And I love the episode. But what I loved about the episode, when I reflected on it later, was the name of the restaurant. What a great name for a rib place, Adam's Ribs, right? That was a place obviously only women are supposed to eat at, right? Right? Because the second story is that Eve was created from the rib of the man, okay, Adam, okay. So the two texts are on the first page here. The first account of the creation of humanity in Genesis chapter 1 doesn't talk about the differentiation between Adam and Eve, and that Adam was created first and then Eve out of the rib. That's the second story from chapter 2. Somebody want to read for us from Genesis chapter 1? Thanks, Judy.
All right. God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all kinds of creeping things of the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth."
Okay.
Why does at the beginning it say, "Let us make man in our image"?
Oh, very good. Nice close reading of the text. So God's speaking, and the question is, who's God speaking to, right? Why the first person plural, right? So there are a couple quick answers, right? None of which are fully satisfactory. Right? One commentator says that God is speaking in the royal we, right? You know how the Queen says, "We shall," when she really means "I shall," right? Okay. So there's this idiom of the royal we. Maybe it's that. Most scholars and commentators believe that God is really talking to the pantheon. Contrary to popular belief, right? This bubble bursting moment, right? Judaism, at least as as presented in the Bible and the Torah, absolutely does not believe that there's only one divine being that inhabits the divine realm. After all, we call God the Lord of hosts. Well, who are the hosts? It's not us. We're not the hosts, right? We're talking about some other divine or semi-divine beings that live up there with God. We call them angels. In the Hebrew text, it's malachim, which is angels or emissaries, messengers. In fact, a few chapters on, just before the flood story, we get this whole story about how the sons of gods, the B'nai Elohim, come down and cohabit with the daughters of men. And there are these beings that then appear on the earth as a result of it, which are obviously by the text understood to be some mixture of divine human beings. So we've got more than just God up there in the divine realm, at least as we understand it from kind of a basic reading of the text, which kind of makes sense. Otherwise, where would these divine emissaries come from? They couldn't just poof appear on earth, and then disappear, right? We're not having some existence prior to it or after it. So, however, it's all rather troubling and difficult. Right? All right. The text that I put in front of you is explicitly gender specific. It's the way in which we classically translate these texts. Most of the times where it says man there, I think practically all of them, the Hebrew is Adam, okay, which is the Hebrew word for Adam. And really, if you pick up a modern translation of the Torah, you will see it translated as humanity, right? Let us make humanity in our image, after our likeness.
That's what it says literally?
Well, it says, let us make Adam in our image. But the question is, how do you understand the word Adam? Right? Is Adam to be understood simply as Adam, the man, or is it a term that really references all of humanity? And most scholars and most translations today will translate it as, this refers to all of humanity. Let's make all of humanity in our image.
Well, it would have to be in the first one because Adam's not made yet.
Well, and even though Adam, the word, is there in the text.
So it is there.
It's there. It says, let us make Adam in our image, after our likeness. And God created Adam in his image.
Wouldn't that be one of the few times God treated women equally?
Well, God treats women equally all the time. It's we who got it wrong all the time.
Maybe. I mean, I like it that it's,
Yes.
both.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, there's a sense of the absolute equality here
Right.
of male and female, created as two parts of the same whole, and the whole being humanity. Okay, so that's how what the first story reads.
No, that women are equal to men.
Interesting.
Yes, in certain regards.
Yes and no.
It's without wanting to tar all of Orthodoxy with the same feather. Even though we know that separate but equal is inherently unequal, right? That doesn't really work, right? The Orthodox view is that women and men absolutely have equal importance in terms of a value, but the realms they operate in are different. The male realm is the synagogue and study and Torah and so forth, and the woman's realm is the home and the children and education and all that goes with that. But they wouldn't say that one is more important than the other. Really, when pressed, I mean, most Orthodox scholars would say, it's not that they're less than we are. It's not that we are greater. It's not that we're less and they're greater. It's that we have different
Isn't there some
areas.
prayer, the first prayer in the morning that says something like
Yeah, thank God that I'm not a woman. Shalom asani isha. But what's the context of that? The context of that, right? On the one hand, right? I mean, we got rid of it in Reformed Judaism. It was right out the door with our earliest liturgical emendations because of the implications in the face of a brand of Judaism that embraces equality and egalitarianism.
They accepted shrimp and threw that out.
In with the shrimp, out with the thank God I'm not a woman, right? But what does that come from, right? That is a blessing that thanks God for the being held responsible for the totality of all mitzvot, of all commandments. That's what that means, right? Because there is a differential in obligation between men and women in the category of mitzvot. Men are obligated to observe all of them. Women are exempt, which means that they can observe, but they are not held liable of having committed a transgression if they do not, for all positive time-bound commandments. So what's a positive time-bound commandment? Well, you should say these prayers at these times as a positive time-bound commandment, right? You've got to do this, say a prayer, at a particular time, right? So why would men be obligated and women not be? Well, if women are obligated to be at synagogue 3 times a day, just like the men are obligated to be in communal prayer 3 times a day, right? Then what happens when the time for prayer conflicts with the time to,
Breastfeed.
feed the kids, get them off to school, put them to bed, wake them up, take a nap, right? Whatever it might be, right? Okay, teach them. Okay, right? So there's only one positive time-bound mitzvah that women are not exempt from.
Lighting Shabbat candles.
Lighting Shabbat candles, which has to happen at a particular time, and it's something you do. Right? That's the only one. That's the exception to the rule. Right? So when an Orthodox man says his blessing, thank God for not making me a woman, they're really saying, although maybe it's, kind of reads as apologetics, thank you, God, for obligating me to the totality of the mitzvah system. Right? But it comes off a little harsh. Okay, so creation of Adam 1, Adam the first, right, is this holistic creation. All right. Adam the second is the story of Eve being created from Adam's rib. All right, somebody want to read for it?
I will.
Okay.
When the Lord God made earth and heaven, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, Because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil, but a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. The Lord formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being.
Okay, so this is the Adam is created from the dust of the earth. Okay.
And with breath from God.
Okay, and with breath from God. All right, keep going.
The Lord said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him." And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to all the birds and of the sky and to all the wild beasts. But for Adam, no fitting helper was found. So the Lord God cast a deep sleep upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man.
Okay, so what's the rationale for the creation of woman?
Adam needed a helpmate.
Nobody else there.
Adam needed a partner. Right? All right, it's a sense of partnership. Okay, all right, it's that Adam is alone. There is existential loneliness. Right, and the other half of humanity, right, is created in order to help Adam the second, Adam 2, if you will, overcome that existential loneliness. Right? And in fact, the text explicitly says it's not good for him to be alone. Right? Connection with others is not only an emotional or intellectual or physical need, but it is an existential one. Right? We're not going to read through the full 3 paragraphs of explanation of Rav Soloveitchik on the back from A Lonely Man of Faith, but you can read it at your leisure or skim through it and listen at the same time if you want. But in essence, really, Soloveitchik, in an incredible insight, really distinguishes between sort of, as Al had said, Adam the first, Adam 1, is this sense of humanity that wants to master the environment, wants to create, wants to do for ourselves. Okay?
That's what he was told to do.
Right. I mean, after all, right? Master the earth, fill the earth and subdue it. Right? Okay. Adam the second seeks relationship. Right? Adam the second seeks the other. And really, Adam the second is the one that we really kind of focus in on as kind of, on the one hand, there's the Adam the first. You got to be alone in order to realize your full potential, right? But on the other hand, we also must be a member of a community. You have to be in relationship to others. Or another Orthodox scholar, Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz, wrote that here we have what is perhaps the second paradox of the search for self. Only by ceasing to see oneself as a supremely independent essence can one say with all sincerity, this is where I am. So it's only by giving up that sense of individual differentiation from all others is the way to root oneself in a place, because then you can be in relationship to others. So, you know, we're kind of set up from kind of our creation to be, on the one hand, you know, desirous of our individual achievements and what we can do on our own, but on the other hand, recognizing that community, with all of its challenges and all of its demands and all of its sacrifices, is comforting. It is something we need. We weren't meant to be hermits, right? Living in our own cave, away from everybody else. In the Mishnah, in Pirkei Avot, Hillel, the great sage Hillel, teaches, do not separate yourself from the community. Right? Don't be that ember that pulls away from the fire. Okay. So having said all of that, and kind of leaving somewhat unresolved that tension, because really there isn't a full resolution to the tension, let's go to our packets. and let's start studying some of the texts that are presented in here that help us understand a bit about our relationships with one another, and goes to a particular issue in the relationship between the individual and the community. So we're on page 2. We're going to talk at first about the Holiness Code, which is Leviticus chapter 19, all right, and is the Torah portion that we read on, this is a test, what holy day? What high holy day? Yom Kippur.
I had to take a test.
I won't ask you if it's in the morning or the afternoon, lest you reveal whether you were there in the morning or the afternoon. I wouldn't want to do that to you. It's the afternoon. Okay? The afternoon of Yom Kippur, this is our Torah reading, Leviticus chapter 19, the Holiness Code. Okay? So from this third book of the Torah, all right, the book of Vayikra or Leviticus, all right, and it's called the Holiness Code because of the opening verse of the chapter, which says, and God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites, and speak to the community, and say to them, Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." All right. So the code sets up for us this idea of this is the goal. This is the ideal. All right. So we want to read for us the intro. Well, Terry, you read last. Al, you want to read for us?
Not really.
Okay. You want to read, Livingstone?
Okay. This text comes from the book of Vayikra,
Yep. Vayikra. Good.
or Leviticus, and appears in the section known as the Holiness Code. This section of the Torah contains many of the moral imperatives of Judaism. These include some well-known texts such as, "You shall be holy, for I, the eternal God, am holy. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind," and many others. One message coming out of this section of the Torah is the holiness is not confined just to the priesthood. Each individual Israelite is expected to attain holiness by following the laws within the section. Likewise, this book seems to claim the holiness is not just a matter of worship or ritual life, but is an integral part of interpersonal relationships and social behavior, both of which must follow God's laws and expectations. The verses below are part of the establishment of parameters for the relationships we are to develop among our relatives, friends, and neighbors.
Okay. So we are in pursuit of holiness by following the dictates, the precepts, the values, the things that are laid out in this section of the Torah, so we're told. So here are 3 verses in particular, and the suggestion is that these are parameters about our interpersonal relationships. Okay? All right, everybody clear on that so far? All right, so let's read these 3 verses. Judy, you already read. You want to read again, though? Okay. You can do Hebrew or English, whichever you choose. There you go. No problem. Okay, great.
Do not go about as a talebearer among your kinspeople. Do not stand by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Eternal. Read them all.
Mm-hmm.
You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove, admonish, or correct your fellow, but incur no guilt because of your fellow. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinspeople. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Eternal.
Okay. So, what are the obligations that come from this text? These 3 verses.
No gossip.
Okay, so you read talebearers gossiping. Okay.
Yes.
Do unto others as we do you.
Okay, so the golden rule.
Be
Okay.
kind.
All right. All right. Be kind. Where's the kindness? Okay, love.
you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good save.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anytime.
Don't hate.
Don't hate. Okay. You should not hate your brother in your heart.
And don't correct people. You don't, right?
Well, it says.
Oh,
Doesn't it say reprove?
Oh,
It does say admonish. Correct.
Mm.
Right. So
Okay,
correct them, but
Oh,
You don't put it on as a guilt trip.
on them.
don't put it on a guilt trip as them. But it says don't incur any guilt because of them.
Right.
Now, what does that mean?
Don't take on guilt because you've done it.
Well, that's them.
No, not necessarily.
Don't
You.
Yeah,
So don't feel guilty for reproving them.
exactly.
For
A lot of
correcting
people
them.
do.
You.
Okay. All right.
Love
Sorry.
your neighbor.
Love-
and yourself.
Love your neighbor as yourself. Right. Okay.
If you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor.
Well, that's true. Yes, it's actually a very complex, much more complex idea than we've often think about. How about don't stand by the blood of your neighbor? We don't know what that means, do we? Nobody, because you all avoided it. So,
The only thing I
Not
can,
kill.
yeah,
I
so
don't
maybe
know.
it means don't kill. Yeah.
I think it means don't approve of his badness. In other words, don't stand on, when he does something wrong, don't, and it kind of goes.
So you see it as an introduction to the
Yeah,
next verse.
In other words,
Hmm.
you don't do anything about someone doing something wrong. You just stand by and stand in his own blood.
Right.
That's not what, I thought the opposite. It's encouraging you to do something. When
No,
someone
that's-
does something
Mhm.
No, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. Don't stand and, do something about it.
Don't condone.
Don't
Right.
condone
Don't
it.
Mhm.
Right. That's what I'm reading.
Right. Oftentimes, we understand the blood of your neighbor is, when your neighbor's bleeding, right? So if something's happened that has shed blood, right? Don't just stand there on the blood and ignore it. Don't just walk on by, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Maybe do something about
Get
it.
involved.
Okay. All right. So the text is interesting. Again, translation always involves interpretation. The don't go about as a talebearer is now often translated as do not deal basely with members of your people. The lo telech rachil, right? The don't walk, don't go as a rachil is a difficult word, and some translators see it as related to the word rochel, a peddler, one who sells things. Right? So that we don't really know what rachil means. There are times when there's a suggestion that that the thing that dealing basely could be is by telling tales, right? By being a gossiper, or could be a liar, right? I mean, we don't know whether it's saying don't go about lying about the people in your community, or just don't go about talking about them.
Sometimes it's the same.
Sometimes it is the same. Right?
So that's the oldest interpretation of what Rachel means.
Rachel means a talebearer, but we customarily now sort of say don't deal basely with, because we don't really know whether or not it's talebearing or it's something else. And maybe it is don't go around peddling falsehoods. Don't go around selling tales. Hey, let me tell you something. You tell me something, I'll tell you something. The translation also, a more modern translation, is do not profit by the blood of your fellow, rather than do not stand by the blood of your neighbor. The Hebrew is literally al lo ta'amo, don't stand, al dam, on the blood, re'echa, of your neighbor, or But it is possible that it's meant to understand. Don't profit from, what goes wrong with them or for them.
So like being an ambulance chaser.
There you go. Like being an ambulance chaser, right? But one of the commentators, one of the medieval commentators, Ibn Ezra, says that this forbids us to associate with bloodthirsty people. Don't fall in with the people who want to take blood, who are the violent ones in the community. Don't go with the wrong crowd, kind of thing. Okay.
Isn't that why the United Church of Christ is boycotting goods that are made in Palestine that Israel earns the profit on? I mean, that's their exact rationale.
That Israel is shedding blood.
Well, because it's
and profiting from the work of the Palestinians, so we're not going to.
So that's the reason. I mean, people that I know that are part of that synod or synod,
synod, yeah.
Say that it has nothing to do with being anti-Semitic, and I believe that people that I
right.
know. But that's really exactly what they're.
Well, but of course it's a pretty significant. It is a biased view of what the economic relationship is between companies that are manufacturing products and that are Israeli companies that are have manufacturing sites either in the West Bank. Or utilize Palestinian labor.
Yeah, I mean, I asked, how do you know?
Right.
And the reply was that it's very well documented. Just like you can tell here what companies are having their goods made in China or in
right.
Vietnam.
But it operates under the assumption. We operate under the assumption that there are certain countries where we know that we have documented where they engage in child labor. So therefore, you don't want to buy a shirt that's, made in Thailand or whatever because it's, likely to have been made by, children, child labor. And I know this was a big issue when I lived in Australia because they obviously imported a lot of their goods from Southeast Asia and from China, and a number of the Jewish clothiers, for example, were really hard pressed, but then it made a lot of effort to go and visit the factories that they were buying from to determine what kind of labor practices were in place in those factories. But told stories about how, when they knew that when the big boss is coming, that day the children don't come to work. So it's tough. But we operate under that assumption. That's why we don't buy from certain places or companies because of the child labor issues, right? Or because of the conditions of the labor. So it's the assumption that there's something wrong, right, with the economic relationship between the Palestinian worker and the company that they're working for in this manufacturing site. And is it simply the fact that these are people who have been displaced from their ownership of their land, or is it because they're really, working in poor conditions and not being paid fair wages and being taken advantage of in some way? And I don't think that there's much evidence that it's the latter.
Really, I would say it's all of the above.
I don't think it is. I think that Israel is pretty conscientious, and Israeli companies are pretty conscientious about the kind of labor practices they engage in. Because there's already enough of the world that doesn't want to buy from them, simply because they're Israel, and simply because they might be operating a factory, in outside of Hebron, right? But they see themselves as actually providing employment and an economic future for Palestinians who want to work.
Well, it's the same as McDonald's. Do you commend them for employing people, or do you condone them for paying them $8 an hour?
Right.
I mean,
And to
Right.
bring it back
Yeah.
to this, I think we as Americans hear the word profit and we think immediately of money and
Mhm.
commerce,
Right.
but it could mean gain, not just financial, but gain from, in other words, you say something bad about somebody to make yourself look better.
Right.
Which is
Sure. Or it improves your position. Like, hey, okay, well, my rival is now dead, so I can marry the girl he was going to marry because I really loved her.
But I mean, going back to
there could be all sorts of ways to profit from the blood of my neighbor.
going back to what you just said, though, in our travels, I remember one time we were with an official mayor of a town in Turkey, and we were getting out of the cab or whatever, and being an American, what do? Take out $1 and hand it to the cab driver for a tip. Okay, that's what I did. And the mayor said, I wish you wouldn't do that. He said, that $1 equals 2 weeks' wages. Guy won't even work for the next 2 weeks because he's just made enough money to live on for 2 weeks. He said, give them whatever it was, which would equal about 3 or 4 cents, okay, one of their coins. He said, that's what you give them. Because if you give them more because we expect the $1, then what you're doing is you're just creating another problem down the line.
Right. There's all sorts of laws of unintended consequences.
Exactly. There's a lot
overseas,
of consequences that go with that.
But I think I don't think that the attempts to create economic opportunities and or employment opportunities in the West Bank has those negative overtones.
No, I don't either.
Not toward any factors.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
I mean, I have in Southeast Asia, but.
Right. So how would fulfilling these obligations impact interpersonal relationships? What kind of relationships would they create? And what does it mean that it's in the context of kind of this you shall be holy?
well, it impacts every relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to take the high road. It's just tougher to.
I don't,
Well, what's the high road defined as?
Right. I mean, I don't know if it's a high road. It's a concept of being righteous, holy.
Okay. Being righteous, being holy. Okay.
Yeah.
So these kinds of
Not being
interpersonal
correct,
relationships are supposed to be guided by this sense of holiness, right? So what does that word holiness mean?
Like God.
Like God, right? So one of the most interesting things I think about Judaism is this insight that our relationship with God and our relationship with other people are interdependent, right? That how we relate to one another has an impact on whether or not we are fulfilling our relationship with God, which asks of us to be godlike, asks of us to try and be holy, and to express that holiness in terms of how we treat one another. Right? That the vertical relationship, if you will, right? Because I think Al was using that word before, between us and God is very much intertwined and linked to the horizontal relationship between us and others. Right? You following that?
Sure.
Okay. So that therefore, when we are told to do things like don't hate your brother in your heart, right? And yet it says reprove, admonish, correct him, your fellow, but incur no guilt because of him. So let's try and unpack that. So what do they not want us to do, right? Helen said it positively from the next verse, love your neighbor as yourself, right? But here it says, don't hate your brother in your heart. Don't hate in your heart. So why would you hate in your heart? What could cause hate in your heart? Anger.
Somebody who
Fear.
gave and did gossip on you.
Okay. Somebody who did something wrong. Envy can lead to hatred. Right? Okay. All right. So let's take that there's some reason to hate. Let's not take that it's on us, fear, envy. That's, our own mishigas most of the time, right? Okay. Let's take someone who really did something wrong.
Right.
Okay. So somebody did something wrong, but you're not supposed to hate them. Right? So what are you supposed to do? What does the next part of the verse say? Reprove, admonish, or correct them. Call them on it.
Right.
Hey, you were out of line. You shouldn't have gone about telling those tales about me. Okay? You're out of line. Got to change your behavior, man. Okay? But incur no guilt.
You don't put guilt on him.
No,
that he did.
that's not what it means.
No,
You don't feel guilty because you
I guess yeah.
That doesn't say don't feel guilty.
don't be guilty.
Don't be guilty. So what does it mean if you're guilty? What does it mean to be guilty? If you're guilty, you've done
Something wrong.
something wrong.
Ah.
You haven't done anything wrong because you.
Have you? Okay, there's the question.
Is the
All right?
I feel
Right.
better now.
Right? Is it possible to have an attitude towards a person who has done something wrong, and in your attitude towards them, be it hatred, right, or in the manner in which you reprove, admonish, or correct them, that you have actually done something wrong?
Yeah, it's the way that you do those.
Right? Okay.
Taking justice into your own hands.
Taking justice into your own hands. There you go. There's a good example. All right.
Or even judging that the way somebody did it wasn't the way you think it should be done.
The way in which you should have reproved them. The way in which they should have been corrected. Right. Well, in verse 17, there's that phrase in the Hebrew, the last word of the first line, okay, I'm saying it again. Last word of the first line and the first word of the second line in verse 17 look almost the same. Tochechah, tochechah. Right. It's one of those great Hebrew doublings where it's there for kind of emphasis. Right. It is the source of this idea called tochechah, which is reproach, admonishment, correction. All right. So you should surely do tochechah. You should surely admonish, reproach, correct them. Right. But the key question is how. Right. What's the proper way to do it? Okay. I think there's really kind of this issue of tochechah gives us some insight into this tension between the individual and community, right? If somebody is really being a nasty, nasty person, right? What's our tendency? What do we want to do?
In your face.
Well,
Oh,
you said back away. You said get in their face. But as a community, what do we like to do? Ostracize. We want to push them out, right? If someone is toxic in a community, right, the community tries to figure out how do we get rid of them? How do we drive them away, right? Okay. But thinking of someone as toxic that needs to be driven away, boy, that comes awfully close to you shall not hate your brother, right? I mean, that's kind of, when I think about hate, I mean, most of us don't get to the level of hate. I mean, hatred's pretty strong, right? And most of the time, especially in community context, we don't get to that level. But just every so often, there's someone who really pushes your buttons, right? And pushes them enough that you're like really frustrated, right? And they're really causing trouble, right? Okay. And yet, we are a community, right? So then you kind of, okay, well, there are people who say, look, I'm not going to join that community because some of the members don't meet my standards. Right? And Hillel, the guy who said don't separate yourself from the community, says don't condemn your fellow until you've stood in his place, right? Don't say that their standards don't measure up. You're not part of it. You're not encountering what they're encountering. You're not doing what they're doing. There are those who might say, I avoid the community because whenever I speak up, nobody listens or appreciates my insights. And Hillel says, well, maybe the fault is yours, right? Don't make an ambiguous statement that's not readily understood. And our tradition goes on to tell this kind of story that kind of talks about sort of, a little anecdote that says, we're so quick to see the shortcomings or the failings and faults of others, but we don't as quickly recognize our own foibles, right? Our own character issues, right? In the story, the anecdote told of the housewife who was complaining to the person, the maid, I guess, or whoever was cleaning the house, that the house was not cleaned and dusted properly, and the maid was was flushed with amazement because the house looked immaculate, right? And finally, she turned to the matron of the house and said, "Madam, I think the dust you see is on your own glasses." And the woman, sure enough, removed her glasses, and the lenses were covered with dust. Right? So, it's very interesting to kind of, there's a wonderful little anecdote about projecting onto others, right, what really might be wrong with ourselves. Okay. So let's read about Rabbi Yanai, and you can read and unpack all about the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud and the tractate Bava Batra, et cetera, which all this comes from. All of that, not necessarily to understand the text itself, but if you want to know a little bit about the background, you can look into that and look it up and unpack it yourself. But let's go to Rabbi Yanai. Shelley, you want to read for us about Rabbi Yanai?
Rabbi Yanai had a tree that overhung the public way, and another man also had a tree overhanging the street. Some passerby objected, and he was summoned before Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai said to him, "Go away now and come again tomorrow." During the night, Rabbi Yanai sent and had his own tree cut down. On the next day, the man came back, and Rabbi Yanai told him to go and cut the tree down. He, the other man, said, "But sir, you also have one." Rabbi Yanai replied, "Go and see. If mine is cut down, cut yours down. And if mine is not cut down, you need not cut yours down." Why did he, Rabbi Yanai, say to the man?
Not say to the man.
Not say to the man, "Go and cut yours down, and then I will cut mine down." In conformity with the teachings of
Reish Lakish,
who said, "Trim yourselves and then trim others."
So, pretty straightforward point. What's the point?
Be an example.
Be an example. Do it, and then let others follow.
Right. Put your own house in order before you tell someone else to put their house in order. The pot calling the kettle black. There you go. Right. Clean up your pot. Clean up yourself first. Clean your pot. Then you have the right to instruct others. Right. So
pretty straightforward.
What'd you say?
That one there is pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. Okay. All right. So how then are we supposed to go about this reproachment, admonishment, correction of others? Right. What do we learn so far?
Make sure we're taking care of the problem within ourselves before we reproach somebody and start calling on it.
Okay. All right. So we got to be pretty self-aware of our own behavior. All right. And, we grow up, being taught 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 2 lefts do. Right? Okay. It's actually 3 lefts, really, but, left, go right. But it doesn't quite flow. And 2 wrongs don't make a right. Okay, so there's that. Are you in a position that you are not doing the same thing that you're condemning or reproaching another? Then there's the way in which you do it. So what's the way in which you do it? How does that factor?
Like an example.
By example, that's one way to do it.
When we had to do evaluations of teachers. You use the sandwich. So you say something nice, something that they're doing in a positive way, then you, in the middle, say something that could perhaps be improved upon or exchanged, and then you end with the other slice of bread, which is something else that they're doing well.
Mm-hmm.
It's very manipulative.
But it is
Effective.
effective in that you have to provide the correction. It's your obligation.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to make the person, you try not to make the person feel badly. And you try not to make it the person that you are correcting, but the behavior.
And you're thinking about if the tables were turned, right? How would it feel to you if all you heard was criticism and critique? Right?
Gosh, I have from many a boss.
Yes.
Seriously.
That's a lot.
I mean,
different
yeah.
than boss critiquing
Oh,
somebody is
okay.
a lot
No, but
different
this
than, no,
She's
Same
saying
difference.
whoever is
Right.
supervising.
I would.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Whoever is supervising a teacher, like you said, it's your obligation to do that. That's a lot different than,
So too with a boss and somebody who works for them?
no, I mean, that's.
Different. That's all different.
Than peers.
Oh,
Ah.
But
neighbors, yeah.
what you require in a good program is also peer observation,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not, all criticism shouldn't come from the top down. It should also be
Mhm.
hard.
But this is, I think, talking about one-on-one. It's my relationship with my community. It's
Okay,
much a
so you're on the
employee.
you're on the good example. You're on the ONEG team. Okay. And there's 4 or 5 or 6 of you that get together every week and you're putting out the ONEG. And there's just, there's one person in the group that, they just, they put the schmatas in the wrong place all the time, and
I know who
they
that
don't
is.
they don't have a sense of which platter should be higher and lower, and they're always going for too few cookies on too big a plate. Right?
It's getting way too close to home.
Right, and right, and so what do you do?
Get off the committee.
Yeah, just,
No, that's not it. That's interesting, though.
Right.
but what you do is you accept that there are different ways to do things.
Yeah.
Okay, so one would be just accept it and stop being bothered by it.
Right.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
honestly, does it matter if the
Okay.
brownies are above or below?
Mhm.
But it does
Right.
matter
Okay.
to some people.
Okay.
Well,
So
And what if you're in a
maybe it's taking the sandwich approach, right? Okay. Really lovely what you're doing over there with the brownies, right? And I just have a small suggestion about the schmatas over here, right? Right? You find something to praise, right? And then a place to kind of maybe gently, correct, and then something else to, really appreciate all the hard work you're doing and the time you're putting in.
In most
But it's
cases, though, it's
not
so easy to
committed.
say, why do you do this?
Oh, okay, how about sandwich making? No, we won't go there.
So what do you do if this approach is not effective?
Well, it's a question. Well, let's talk about first of all what you don't do.
Your brownies suck.
Okay, all right, there you go. All right.
It's
right.
very close to home.
Right. So first of all, you don't have to be hurtful or harmful, right? Okay. So when it says reprove your fellow, but incur no guilt because of your fellow, right? Don't be rude
God.
to someone
Wow.
and commit this error, the sin of rudeness, right? In your attempt to correct them, right? And to reprove them.
So that's what the whole guilt thing.
I think that's what the guilt is, right?
Interesting.
And I think it goes further too, right? If we go to the teacher model or we go to the boss model, right? Or for that matter, the Oneg model. Right? How do you talk to that teacher? Where do you talk to that teacher? In what setting do you talk to that teacher?
Privately.
Oh, privately. Oh, not in the middle of the kitchen while the whole group is there putting out the Oneg? Right? Right? Okay.
I'm so curious why you chose that as
I was just looking. I don't know. I was just looking for like one like small thing. I mean,
Is this a tell-bearing?
Okay, so you're sitting on the board of trustees of the synagogue.
That's much better.
Well, it is. It is at a certain level all the same, right? There is on the one hand this expectation, this commandment, that in order to be holy, we're supposed to, reprove. We're supposed to engage in tochechah. Right? It's the right thing to do to tell someone that they're missing the mark. Why?
Does it say
Well-
anywhere in the teachings that you shouldn't judge? Because that's like a new buzz thing. Don't judge other people.
No.
No, it doesn't say that.
No, it says the opposite. It says judge.
Yeah.
So I wonder where
It says
that-
judge.
where
It
does
says right
judge
here.
come from? That we should
But it-
judge others.
60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it
Hey, all's love and peace and
Yeah.
all
Peace
good,
out,
you
man.
know?
is it all based on everything? In other words, there's a lot of things that people do, whatever. What I'm asking is, if God, the biggest things is holiness and
Mhm.
righteousness,
Yeah.
kindness and
Yeah.
charity, okay, and the Torah
Yeah.
being the number one. Is that what is being told here? In other words, we don't go out and try to make people Jewish. We're supposed to show people the way to be righteous, the way to be holy, the way to.
Right. Well, and I would say,
See God.
what I also take from it is that it's about bigger things than brownies and schmatzes.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting
right.
at.
It's in other words, the what are we supposed to judge, right? And on what basis do we judge? Well, it's not really about whether you put 6 brownies on the plate or 8 brownies on the plate, right? It's about whether or not you are willing to contribute to enhancing the value of Oneg Shabbat and the celebratory nature of Shabbat, right? Or whether you just don't care at all about that and aren't ever willing to be to do anything to help at all, right? It's really that's the level of the value. And for the person who says, I'm not ever going to do anything about the Oneg Shabbats, right? Let's take your bar mitzvah class. Right? We articulate an expectation. They're all supposed to help each other out, right? Supposed to work together,
They do.
right? And we're actually starting to tell them, here's how you do it. Organize yourself into teams. Appoint captains. Here's the job of the team. Here's the job of the captain, right? If there were somebody in a given class that were to say, I'm not going to do anything for anybody's Oneg, right? I won't captain. I won't be on any team. I'm not going to bake for anybody. I'm not going to buy for anybody. I don't have time. You don't understand how stressed out my life is. I've got 4 kids in 4 different places. I'm always on the road, and I'm trying to hold down 2 jobs at the same time. And how can you expect me to do anything for anybody else? Well, that's a person to whom somebody needs to do a tochechah. Needs to say, hey, listen, I understand how stressed you are. I know how tough it is. I understand you're working 6 jobs on 6 different days. But you're part of this community of families. And these are, kids that your kid is in class with and is friends with and going to be going to these celebrations. And rather than being so negative, is that can we explore a way in which you can participate that'll work for you?
But doesn't it also matter who says that?
Nope.
So, one example in family.
So it's got to be somebody who's going to be able to be listened to. is going to be able to have the relationship.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, like in Family Promise, a lot of the parents smoke. And, you know, I mean, you're homeless. You can't feed your kids and you're buying cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
But the rule, as it is you don't comment. The person who comments is the caseworker.
Right.
So, I mean, it is very much related to who.
Absolutely. Except that what it really is, right, is your brother and your fellow, right, indicates that there's relationship, right? Okay. In other words, this is not some stranger walking up to some other stranger and trying to tell them where they're going wrong. Okay. So I think you're right. It does matter, but it's not necessarily always the person in authority, or always in a synagogue or community context, the staff person or the president. Right? Sometimes the person that's going to be most effective is the other parent in the class that's working 4 jobs instead of 6 jobs, and has 2 kids instead of 4 kids, and who maybe can, have that entry point to say, look, I get it. I'm not walking the same walk you are, but mine's kind of similar. Yeah. And I understand why you're pressured in this way. But let's talk about some of the bigger values at stake. And maybe they might have the relationship and the commonality to be able to have an impact. Okay.
Does it also say that you're not to be prideful about making a correction?
Prideful or prideful?
Sure.
Prideful.
Right.
Prideful.
Yeah, I mean, I on occasion walked up to a missionary in some other country, an American missionary, and said, I think it's disgusting that you're doing this here in this beautiful Buddhist country, and why don't you go do it in your own country?
Right. How they take that?
I mean, I don't think I had much of that, but
Really? You didn't drum them out of the country, huh?
Well, I felt better.
Yeah.
I don't think the missionary felt particularly badly.
What were they doing?
It's the Mormon missionaries.
Oh.
Yeah.
Trying to
Okay.
convert,
They were walking down the street carrying the Book of Mormon.
Okay, right.
in India and Thailand and
Yeah.
Buddhist countries, Hindu countries, where there's nothing wrong with it.
There are definitely probably what I would say more Jewish ways to express that same feeling and attitude.
Yeah. More effective.
That would be, less like your brownies suck. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And more like, there's just something that doesn't quite taste right about these brownies.
What did you put in this?
But
I didn't think medical marijuana was legal in Florida yet.
What's interesting is in today's world, and we're human and it is the modern world. I remember the people who had that approach with me working, as opposed to the person probably who was kind and found a gracious way to say it. It's sad.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my experience.
Yeah, I remember the same.
So let's at least spend a little bit of time looking at some of the biblical cases of tochechah, of reproof and correction.
Is that what that means?
Tochechah, yeah. It means reproach, admonishment, correction. Okay. So the first one's Cain and Abel. Careful. I warn you, careful as we read this, right? When I first read it, I was like, why is this a story of tochechah? Who's correcting whom? Okay? It's not what you might assume from the get-go. All right? Marjorie, I think we're up to you. You want to read for us?
In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Eternal from the fruit of the soil. And Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. The Eternal paid heed to Abel and his offering. But to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. Cain was much distressed, and his face fell. And the Eternal said to Cain, "Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master." Cain said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him.
All right. So who's offering tochechah to whom? Who did right? Who did wrong? And where is the correction? Or the attempt to correct?
The Eternal one said to him, "Why are you distressed? Why is your face fallen?" Because he corrected him for not following his rule.
Who corrected whom?
God corrected Cain,
For doing what?
failing to offer the appropriate offering.
I think God.
But God doesn't say, "Hey, Cain, the problem is you didn't do the right thing here."
I don't think it was the right thing. It's each one had their own thing that they did. Cain worked from the soil, and Abel worked, on the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
So God liked the ranch better than the farm, basically. And it'd be like, I like your brownies, but I don't like your, I don't like your pie, So if you get mad at me because of that, and that's what he does. He gets mad not at God, but because I like the brownies rather than the pie.
Okay, I'm so confused.
It's very confusing.
I don't think I think that. I think I.
Well, that's good, because I don't think that either.
Well, God is disappointed in his
Well, it
reaction.
looks like God is showing faith.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it looks like God is showing favorites.
No, I think God is punishing Abel.
He's punishing Abel.
For gloating?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't there a couple of lines left out here where Abel does say something to Cain about, ha 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 ha.
That's not here.
I know, but I think in there somewhere.
So
8.
So I struggled with this text as I was, reading it and trying to prepare it. So first of all, I want to take away the quotation marks. Okay? Because I'm not sure. Well, first of all, I know that I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
There are no quotation marks in the Hebrew.
Right.
Okay? Right? So we only know that the text says, "And Adonai, the Eternal, said to Cain, why are you distressed and why is your face fallen?" That seems like, okay, that's God speaking. But when the text continues on, "Surely if you do right, there is uplift," there's no indication in the text that continues to be God speaking. Okay? So I want to suggest the following. I want to suggest that it's the text or the author of the text or the voice of the text that's actually offering a tochechah to God. I think the text is actually critiquing God. Read verse 7 as if it's directed by the text or the speaker to God. Hey, God, surely if you do right, there's uplift. But if you do not, well, don't be surprised that Cain is distressed and his face is fallen. You didn't do right by him. So sin is crouching at the door. Its urge is toward you, and lo and behold, what happens in the next verse? Cain commits the ultimate of sins. Okay? So I think that in some ways you could read the text as if God is being critiqued for having shown favoritism to Abel. The text is warning God about the consequences of that kind of action. And then the text will go on to say, look, this is actually what happens.
So you're able to critique God.
Sure, why
That's
not?
good. Able
Well,
to.
Well, we
critique.
are, but with the original
Hey,
people
very
who wrote
good.
this text,
Do that.
But now it
Yeah.
started to question why did he pick Abel and paid heed to his offering and not Cain?
Because
That's
he
got to
liked
me-
meat.
No. That's got, and somewhere in the Torah I read that everything starts with the choice of the firstlings. You don't give God
Right. In the order you're born.
Yeah, you give your
Mm-hmm.
first things and the most valuable one.
Yeah, so you can interpret that,
That's almost
right, that
automatic.
Cain didn't give the best. Cain didn't give the first fruits.
God had to pick you,
Hmm.
and then that created. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how I see it.
Sure.
That's true. It doesn't say the first.
That's a good interpretation of the text, and it's good reading of the text within the context of our tradition and the literal level. No, I don't think that the intent of the author of the text, if you will, was necessarily to reproach God. I think that the text at its literal level is God criticizing Cain for his reaction
First,
to
he didn't do the right thing. Second, he had the reaction.
right. So if you do right, all's good. If you don't do right, if you don't offer up the right offerings, well, there's consequences, right? Sin crouches at the door, right? Its urge is toward you. Now you can master it. You don't have to give in. You've done the wrong thing once. Don't give in to it next time that sin's crouching at the door, right? So the literal level of the text is God trying to correct kind of Cain's thinking and behavior. But I like turning it on its head because I like the idea
Because you always do.
well, I always do. But I like the idea that that there are times when even the one who is supposed to be infallible, right, in any community makes mistakes, right? And has to be shown that there are consequences. Right?
That being God had to be shown.
In this case, yeah. Right? I mean, especially in the context of early Genesis text, we're all still figuring it all out. Right? This whole sort of, dance between what's God and what's humanity, and where are the lines in between, and where's the trespass, and what's us and what's them, right? Absolutely. So.
do we know who the authors are?
Mm-hmm.
Will you tell us?
Yes, we might. I mean, could be any of us. Could be all of us. Could be God. Could be, we don't know. I mean, it's all of the above. I mean, tradition tells us, says, well, God wrote the text. God dictated the text. Moses sat there with the ancient quill pen for 40 days and 40 nights and dictated it, or stood there and watched God write it out. Right?
That's what I believe. Works for
There are
me.
people who believe that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean.